We're on. Good afternoon, everybody. Brendan Cunningham here with a cast of thousands. Today we're going to do the deep dive on the real estate contract. Now, a lot of you have certainly a working familiarity with the contract, and that's fine. But today I thought we would do a little fireside chat. So we're going to talk about some of the things that you think you know, but you probably didn't know, or some of the things that the attorneys just kind of gloss over, but things that are really, really important. Some of what we're going to talk about is actually a part of a course that I teach at the association called Selling Real Estate in Volatile Times. The reason why I'm going to cover this particular segment of the contract is because I am of a conviction and belief that volatile times or not, you want to keep your ship going straight ahead. You don't want to have to keep going back. You don't want to have to keep going back and fixing the transaction. If you have to go back and fix a transaction, if you have to go back and add an additional addendum, I don't say you're doing something wrong, but you're working not to your maximum output. Everything that you do should be looking forward toward your next deal. But much like the Bills when they're playing in a championship season, you got to finish the game. But what you don't want to do is have lots of fumbles in that game. What do you think? That was a pretty good sports analogy. All right. So having said that, we're going to look at some of the things that I call problem areas in the contract, things that get glossed over, things that in the current market that we are working in and in the current cultural environment that we're working in, many times people don't go over the contract the way they should have or the way they certainly used to. It's fill in the blanks, sign here, sign here, sign here, and most people don't know what the hell they're signing. I would hazard to guess that 99% of the people that are practicing real estate today have never, ever read the contract in its entirety. If you did, you'd have questions. You should have had questions. But they'll sort of go over some of the things. I'm going to go to the most important things that are in the contract. And I'm going to start out with clause number 3 on the contract. Now, the people in the peanut area, they have hard copies of the contract. I'm going to try and flash one on the screen, and hopefully I get this right. HTM1, do that, okay. And then looking for the signal, it's coming, there we go, we are in business. Clause number 3, which I wish I could take credit for this labeling of this clause, but this is actually a Tom Cusack title. He calls this the lawsuit clause. If you are going to have trouble in a transaction, chances are it's probably going to show up with something to do with clause number 3, and more specifically, 3D. Everything that's in here is in here for a reason, because at some point, there was some sort of a discrepancy. When I talk about discrepancies, let me also position something and tell you, there's 3 things that you always need to keep in mind whenever you have a real estate contract, or any contract. There's the legality, there's the reality, and then there's something that I call leverage. Leverage is sometimes the winner on either of those. It trumps both of those. But having said that, let's look at something. D, land and other improvements. These are things, now, it says here, unless they're excluded, they're included. Starts out with all of the land. Well, of course, all the land. Well, you know what? Let me tell you something. That's in there for another reason. Because I saw somebody sell a vacant lot in Orchard Park, and yes, they were using a vacant land rider, but at any rate, the seller thought that it was perfectly okay to take off the top 2 layers of topsoil. He took all the topsoil off this, what was previously a buildable lot, and he left these people with a house that had to be literally built on the hard pan, had to dig below the hard pan. Thank God there wasn't granite in there. But that's why that's in there, believe it or not. Here's another one here. Trees. Who's going to be taking the trees? I'm going to tell you a quick story, okay? If I gave you the whole full-length story, it's very funny, but I'll give you the condensed version. I always go over this particular clause, whether I'm working with a buyer or with a seller. I have it down to pretty much a 2 or 3 minute drill, but I'm going to go into detail with you. But I go over every piece of it so that the buyer knows what he's getting and the seller knows what he's conveying. Having said that, an agent asked me to just go out and get contracts signed. This was in the olden days, okay, where you had to physically get contracts signed, didn't have this stuff. So I went to the person's house and I went over this thing. I said, you know what? I could just have you sign things, but I like to go over this. I did a better job for the agent than they would have done for themselves because that's just something that I do. And I said, okay, let's go through this. Let's take a couple of all the trees. And they said, stop. They stopped me at trees. And I said, oh, I said, there's a tree that you want to take? She said, yes. Magical words. I always use these magical words. No problem. And then I gather information. I'm going to give you the condensed version of how the story went. But I looked out the window for the tree that they said was there. I couldn't find the tree. But I was looking for a tree that had a trunk about this big. In my time, I had personally replanted or planted 1,156 trees. Now, 1,000 of them were teeny tiny. They were Christmas trees for Christmas trees. And now they're all bigger than I. But I had planted some large trees. And once you get a trunk around that big, the root ball is like this. It's huge. But I was looking for a little tree. And I said, I can't see one. I can't find one. Finally, she pointed the tree out to me. The tree had a diameter of at least 8 feet. I could not get my arms around it. It had to be at least 150 years old. And the root base had to be like an acre. Okay? Physically, we do not have the technology to move this tree. Fast forward, I said, no problem. I asked her a whole series of questions. And finally, I was able to get it. I said, well, this is the reason we want to move this, because even though we're moving to Rochester, I look out my window and I see my children playing in that tree. And one of the children had died. So this was a very special memory for her. I was able to at least get her to understand that, you know what? You're selling the house, you bring your memories with you. But she wanted to take the friggin' tree. You'd need skidders, and it was physically impossible unless she had the Starship Enterprise do it. But if we had never discussed it, she probably would have brought it up in closing, installed things, and never closed. Okay, improvements. Oh, mineral rights. We don't need to go into that, but I can tell you one thing. I learned a lot about mineral rights when I bought my first house up here, because I bought a 30-acre horse farm, and there was a gas well within 100 yards of the border of my property. They had storage tanks under my property. I didn't get the rights, but I had to give up the storage rights. So it's just a quirk, but that's why that's in there. Air conditioning except window units. Well, obviously the window units, they come out, right? We know that unless they're attached, you can remove them, that whole thing. However, I just sold the property and it had air conditioning window units in there. And when the person bought the house, he says, do they stay? And I said, you know what? They're not normally included, but we can include them. Guess what? We included them. They got them. Plumbing. I don't know who's removing the plumbing. I don't know who's removing the septic system, the well pumps, or the water pumps. I don't know who's doing that. But let's get to water filtration systems. When I bought that first house in East Aurora, it had a well. I know more about wells than I ever wanted to know. And water. I knew one thing. Even though the water was technically potable, it was disgusting. It smelled like sulfur. People have been drinking the water for 100 years. But I was a nice city guy, and I wasn't going to drink it. So I bought the Cunningham system. I bought everything that Cunningham made to clean up that water. It was delicious by the time I got through. But I paid $10,000 for that system 30 years ago. I don't know what it's worth today. But the last thing that Corky Cunningham said to me is, and here's the best part, this system is 100% transportable. It's like changing the light bulb. You just unscrew, and you take it with it. And say, oh, that's good to know. Now, based on that reality, and based on this contract, and based on the fact that you will probably sell houses with water filtration systems, this water filtration system is included. So if I was listening to Corky and I took my water filtration system out because it's portable, I would have been in trouble here. So that's why you go over this. I have seen closings, never happened to me, but I have seen closings interrupted because they did take a filtration system out, even though the contract called for it to stay. And guess what? However much money it would have cost to reimburse them, they weren't going to do it. The deal died. So that's why that's in there. Let's go to matching kitchen islands. That's something that's in there because of me, by the way. It was one of my little additions in there when I was on forms of contract. I sold a house back in the early 2000s, maybe 2005. One of my first rents, I redid the kitchen. I had a wonderful wood-molded kitchen, granite countertops, and I had an extra piece of granite laying around. I didn't have an island, but I said, you know what? I'm not going to throw this piece away. So I bought a little portable island. It had wheels on it, and I put this thing on it. It was perfect. Every person that came in to visit me or came over for a drink or whatever always admired the island. When I sold the house, I was just going to include it because what was I going to do it, right? Even though it's on wheels. Every person that came to see the house said, does the island stay? At the time, my wife, who was also a real estate agent, very good agent, she said, it's negotiable. And I said, no, it's included. I didn't want to get it to nickel and diming people, and that's why she's a former wife. Having said that, make sure if it's included or it's included that you know that it is by writing it in on the next page. It's got some other things in here that garage door openers. Obviously they're included. And I always tell people when I get this, make sure if you have garage, leave them on the countertop when we close so that they can find them. Because the nicest person in the world, when they close, if they can't find their garage door opener, you're going to get a phone call, and it's not going to be a pretty one. As I like to say, they will be using a word that begins with F. That's not fiduciary. Okay. One of my favorites. Wood-burning stoves, oil and gas fire space heaters, fireplaces, fireplace inserts, screens, equipment, wood-burning stoves. Now, I'm going to ask members of the peanut gallery here. You read that. How about the shovels? Are the shovels included?
They're supposed to now.
Okay, I have one person saying absolutely yes, and I have another person saying yes, it's supposed to. You're sure?
Yes.
Does it say that in there?
It does say.
What does it say? Show me where it says shovels.
Not shovels, really.
Not shovels, really.
You call them differently.
Okay. So
I call them utensils.
Utensils. Fireplace, inserts, screens, including freestanding screens, grates, glass enclosures. But I don't see anything about shovels or paraphernalia. So you said empirically, yes, they stay, and you say they're supposed to stay.
Yeah.
Okay? But it doesn't say that. So is it reasonable to presume that somebody could make the argument that they don't stay?
Yeah.
Yes, and that's the problem. Because unless you're absolutely positive, if it says black is black, it can't be any shade of gray. So legally, I would read this and say, it doesn't say anything about shovels. I'm taking my shovels because they're very special shovels that Paul Revere made. And I had somebody say that once. These are very special shovels, and he took them with him. But we went over this, and we made sure that we excluded them. You don't want to be in the thing, well, I thought, we just presumed, I assumed, they assumed. If you're using any of those words, you're in trouble, because you got to go back and fix the deal. And chances are, somebody's writing a check for shovels. And I've seen it happen, so don't do that. So that's a hot button.
Isn't it like when they see that they're there, then they're supposed to be like during the showing or open house? It's there.
Yeah, if it's there, fine. However, if there's any question, eliminate the question by making sure on the next page you include it or exclude it. You cannot be too clear because there's a lot of vagaries in this contract. That's why it's called a lawsuit clause. You can tell attorneys drafted it because it leaves room for them to make money when somebody has to sue. All right, let's go to the next page. Easy stuff. Smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors are included. What's interesting, that's a redundancy because you know that certainly in Erie County, I believe it's the same in Niagara County, you can't pass title unless you have smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors. They make you sign an affidavit, but it's in there. Okay. Now, this is where it gets to be fun. Window shades, curtain rods, traverse rods, all styles of window and door blinds. Jump shot to the peanut gallery. What about the draperies? Do they stay?
You have to identify it in the contract.
Yeah, you have to identify. You have to put it. More people get pissed off because the other person took the draperies. Now, here's how we handle this. When I'm going through this, if I'm going through it with a seller, invariably they'll come up and they'll say, oh, no, we're taking the draperies with us. Because, they're custom-made draperies. And I always say, well, here's the deal. If they're custom-made draperies, they're not going to fit the next house. They're custom-made for this house. Now, generally speaking, the higher the price, the more things just are assumed to be included. And especially once I get over $300,000 or $400,000, not only will I tell them, listen, here's the deal. You don't want to have a buyer move into your house. You know, they've just dropped $250,000 or $500,000. And I like to put it that way because we start talking about, oh, it's 250. 250 is $250,000. 350. It's $350,000. When you put those words in it, it changes it. But I say, here's the deal. Dr. Schmo and Schmo, when he buys your house, he doesn't want to move in and have to put sheets up over the windows on his first night. They said, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And especially when you're getting into better properties, think of them as BMWs. There's not a lot of options. It's like you can't say the BMW, well, does it come with power steering? Of course it comes with power steering. Of course it comes with automatic windows. It's just part of the deal. So with better homes, I just presume that everything stays in the house. All the appliances, all the draperies, but I write it in. Okay, leave nothing to chance. And just because you see some items included in the listing statement, where it says, you know, refrigerator, all the stuff's included, that whatever's in the listing is superseded by this document. So it's not here, it may as well not be anywhere, because that's where you can do, well, I thought it was in the listing. Well, great, it doesn't count unless it's here. So, having said that, make sure the drapery stay. Now we get down to, if presently on the property, and unless freestanding, all cabinets, shelving, dishwashers, refrigerators, oven, cooktops, ranges, okay. And unless freestanding, virtually everyone that's listening to us here today, and you people in the audience, I'm going to hazard a guess you have a kitchen stove. And I'm going to hazard a guess that if I go over there, I can pull it out, and if it's gas, I can just disconnect it. True or false? Yes? It's not built in. It's a slide in. They're thinking that that's a built-in. Same thing with refrigerators. Unless you have pretty much a sub-zero refrigerator, they're not built in. They could be a perfect fit, but they're not built in. So technically, stoves and refrigerators are not included, even though everyone's thinking they're included. So I can't, what? Yeah. No. Okay. At any rate, because she knows. But at any rate, so yeah, so this is a vagary. It's misleading. So make sure you include it because somebody could take the things out when you were fully expecting them to be there. Stop it. You can tell we're alive. Okay. No. Oh, I'm thinking I have a touch screen. Let's go down to 3A, where it says the things that are on the property are in substantially the same condition as of the date of the property inspection, and then B says in the condition existing at closing. Which one would you people pick out there? Stuff has to stay the same. It's either as the day of closing, that's what you got, or the day that you looked at the property. Yeah, that's what I would do. I would go for door number 8 because then you know what you got.
Yeah.
Now, if anything breaks in between that, it's the seller's obligation, okay, which is why I want to have a warranty. Now, let's get the purchase price. I harp on this a lot, but let me see where it says deposit, the following payable. Okay, that's actually your escrow deposit. But I've asked this. I can't tell you how many times, and I always get a myriad of answers on this. And I don't know why. There's no consensus on it. But if I'm selling a $100,000 house and they're putting down, and they're going for an 80% mortgage, how much are they putting down? $20,000, very good. And how much money amount should I put in that box? Whatever. Okay, give me a number.
10,000?
10,000. So you would say put half of the 20,000 because that's what they're going to be ultimately putting down.
It's kind of 10,000 for the price, around 250, 300.
Okay, so actually 10,000. If I'm doing 100,000 in a house, you're putting down 10%.
Well, maybe for 100,000, usually maybe you don't have unrestricted right away.
Okay.
10,000, maybe I would say 5,000.
How about you? You say 5,000.
How earnest are you?
How earnest are you? Here's the deal. I always want to get the maximum I can get. And when I first got into real estate business, I did not know. I thought it was a law that you had to put down 10% on contract. That's a matter of custom in many parts of the country. Any of the big boys, any of the big markets, New York, San Diego, they're always, it's 10% down, get out of my face. I try to shoot right for that number, and the number when somebody says, I say, all right, I need money to get this thing going. It's called an earnest money deposit. It will sit in the escrow account until we close. You're putting down 20%. You want to just give me a check for 20? I start out right out of the box. Chances are what you ask for, you just might get. Sometimes they say, well, gee, do I have to give you the whole 20? And I say, well, what were you thinking? Well, I was thinking about 1,000. I say, listen, what do you think is more earnest, 1,000 or 20,000? I said, by the way, when we go to the very next page, actually it's page 3, it says top of 3, it says purchaser is and until closing will be in actual possession in bold print of all the money that they're supposed to have, including the deposit. So the thing is, if they're telling me they're putting down 20,000, I know they have 20,000 someplace because they're saying they have it. I just want to get as much of it as I can. Now, I still use the 10% rule. In this particular case, I'd be perfectly happy to get 10 grand down. Okay? But that's more earnest than 1,000. I've seen multiple offer scenarios where the one deciding factor was how much money they had in the escrow account. The other thing is, if somebody has a lot of money in their escrow account, a lot being a relative term, say $10,000, $20,000, they really think long and hard about walking from a deal. I just closed on a transaction yesterday. It was a 30-day close. It was a cash transaction. It was $250,000, and she put $20,000 in the escrow account. You know why? Because that's what I asked for. She says, what do I need to secure this house? I said, generally speaking, sellers like to see at least 10% down. Do they not? Sure they do. Now, will I get that? Probably not. But if I ask for it, I just might. And having said that, she says, oh, really? Okay. I said, you know what? It makes you feel better. And I just felt gratuitous. I said, that'd be 20. Just give me 20 or call it a day. She gave me 20. The point is, she gave me what I asked for, as opposed to her saying, well, can I give you $100? Now, I know on some of the less expensive properties, you got to fight for getting whatever you get. But try to get as much money in the escrow account as possible. And in this particular case, the reason why I bring it up is because she was closing on a house in Georgia. Now, I explained how this whole thing works, and she was a smart person. She was closing in a house in Georgia. She wanted a simultaneous closing with the house up here. And she was having trouble with the closing down there for one reason or another. And her sister, who's a very smart person, said to her, well, you know what? You should just kill the deal up here and get out of it. So she said, I don't know if I can do that. She says, oh, you absolutely, sure you can. Talk to the agent. I talked to her and said, remember, we talked about this. And I said, it sits in the escrow account until one of two things happen. You close and the money goes to the seller, or you don't close for a legitimate reason. In this particular case, since it's a cash transaction, the only thing that might be legitimate is your death. Because you said you had the money, we have corroboration of funds. I said, if you're applying for a mortgage and you didn't get a mortgage, that would be a legitimate act. But if you just decide because you want to change your mind, you want to go to Acapulco, they should keep your money. Oh, and by the way, they should kill your children. They should do anything. I went on and did on and on. But the point is, they can sue you, they can do all these things. But her own sister said, oh, just get out of it. She asked me about it. So, having said that, that's why you want to have a lot of money, because people want to spook people out of the transaction. Get a lot of money and you're secure. Next, closing contingency. I'm on that page. So now, this is an interesting thing here, where it says you have a couple of scenarios. In order to close this transaction, it requires the closing of the sale of any other real estate, or it requires that you sell the other real estate. Now, if you're doing contingent sales, that's a whole separate matter. But in this particular case, if the other properties, if the person's house is sold, but he's waiting for it to close, that's actually what I call a mini contingency. If I have competing transactions, this is a first-time buyer who doesn't have to close on his house because he doesn't have a house. He's just buying a subject house. And this guy is paying the same exact price, and he has a house to close. I'm going with this guy because, God forbid, this guy's house doesn't close because the guy that's buying his house, see, he loses his job. It's not, it's not because people are being weasels usually. It's because through no fault of their own, they don't close. This is empirically a better deal. So you have to watch that one. A lot of people are skipping over that one. The sale can be subject to successful closing up. Let's go down and look at, if you're doing home inspections, you'll notice in the blank there, if you leave it blank, it's 7 days. That's truly the work of the devil. If you're doing home inspections with anybody and you have anything more than 3 days, you have shot both of your feet off. And let me tell you why. Because I live in the real world, and most people do too. But real estate agents don't live in the real world sometimes because they don't read this. And what it says is unsatisfactory results pursuant to paragraph shall be completed within X number of days. If I leave it blank and I make it 7 days, that I'm telling you this is the way I've seen it happen. You tell me if I'm wrong. The inspector goes in on day 6 or 7, right?
Yep.
That's not what it says. What it says is you do your inspection and you make up your mind by the 7th day. So knowing that, if I put the 7th day, then what's going to happen is the guy's going to go there on day 6, day 7, then he's going to cogitate and stroke his beard if he has one. Then he's going to think, he's going to come back. He's probably having another 2 or 3 days when technically your deal is done at that point. Okay? And don't you want to know if you have a deal? I'm sure the seller wants to know if he has a deal. I'm sure the buyer wants to know if he has. But this 7 days on the default automatically became like another 3 or 4 days. Don't do that. Since you know that people are going to do it on the last day anyway, at least limit it to 3 days, and then you can probably wrap the thing up in 5 days to a week. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So don't do that. Don't hurt yourself by leaving it open to 7. Some people actually put in their remarks, home inspections must be 3 days, and we're not going to do a damn thing. I respect that. This is not my computer. That's why I'm fussing. Excuse me. This is somebody else. With respect to financing. Interest rate. We're now on page, what is this? Financing is on page 5, and we go to first loan. Just understand right now, the interest rates are they're going up. I saw a contract a couple weeks ago. The interest rate had on it was 7.5%. That day, the rate was 8. The contract was dead before I went out of here. So if I'm thinking if the interest rate is 7, I'm going to put at least a full point for it to flux up or down, as the case may be. But most people are thinking the rates are going to be going up. Some people are saying that as high as in 2 years within 11. So I don't know. I don't have the crystal ball, but I know this. Give yourself a little bit of a buffer. I do want to go back to something on which I did miss, by the way. On page 2, this comes up a lot. Gratefully, thankfully, it hasn't happened while I've been at Husvar. I haven't seen anyone do it here, but it does happen. But I did have a conversation with a guy from Premium last week. He says, "Oh yeah, I had to tell this guy because he said to me, hey, listen, now this was after the appraisal was done, right? So you knew that there was a contract, there was an attorney approval, maybe there was an inspection approval with the PINA, and now you're into this thing now for a couple of weeks." And the guy says to the mortgage broker, he says, "By the way, what do I do with this check? Who do I make it out to? Do I just give it to you?" He says, "What check?" He says, for the earnest money. Do I give you that? And he says, "You haven't given that to the broker yet?" He says, well, no. He says, "Well, here's the deal." He says, "You can give it to me," and he says, "and I'll go to Vegas with it." He says, "But I'm the last guy you want to give to. You want to get it over to your broker as quickly as possible." And here's why. It is on page 2. Excuse me. Page 2. Section. No. Hang on. On page 2.
Where the realtor needs to
Here.
sign.
Here's the thing. It says, I'm sorry. It's on page 1.
Yeah. The signature of the
No.
non-receipt.
No. Page 4. Hang on. I'll be right there. Okay, here we go. Clause 4, page 2, it says, The deposit and any additional deposit shall be received by the escrow agent within 5 business days. They have to have receipt of it. In any event, if any of the deposits are not received by the escrow agent within 3 days, so within 5 days you got to tell everybody. Within 3 days after the seller may cancel this contract. So what the guy from premium said is, listen, you got to get it over there because they can cancel your contract at any time because you didn't get it in at time. So I've seen this one happen where people, I forgot. Now, this is a shame on 2 agents. This is a shame on the buyer's agent for not collecting the money and getting it over, but it's a bigger shame on the listing agent because the listing agent is kind of like the goalie. They slipped one past him. That's wrong. Don't do that. I mean, come on, you got to know when the money's coming in or if it's not coming in. I always make it a point, whenever possible, when I get the check, I hand deliver it. I want to make sure that that thing is in there. So, page 4, 3 days. Okay, now let's go to page 9. And I'm skipping over some of the stuff, but this is the real stuff that's going to get you in trouble. With respect to the mortgage and everything, make sure you have real dates in there. Don't leave it blank. It says clause 10. Put actual dates in there. Everybody loves you because they know what September 13th means. They don't know what 45 days after whatever means. Because whatever means, no one ever circles what the whatevers are. It's after the latest of the sale contingency, investigation contingency, satisfaction of property. No one knows because no one can find those things. Okay? It's a crazy thing. So put an actual date. Actual date. And then we go to page 10. By the way, you know the signature lines we have listing agents selling it. It's really nice. You can have the attorneys in there and have it as a completed page when you deliver the contract. It just makes you look like you're really and truly on your game. If you have to keep fussing and going back, well, you know, they haven't got an attorney yet, that's a whole other nightmare. Okay, so now we are at the attorney. Oh, yeah. Page 10. Hang on 1 second. Get my glasses focused. How many people here have had a closing that didn't close when they thought it to because one of the attorneys said, oh, we're waiting for the search and survey? Does that ever happen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It happens. It's pretty much standard bill of fare. And what's funny about that, what's comical about this, the Bar Association actually wrote in on the additional terms and conditions at the bottom of page 9, where it says, order and delivery. Seller shall order the search and survey within 5 business days. That's what it says. That's what they have authorized all the members of the Bar Association to do. What I tell sellers to do is listen, what you really need to do on this, if you want to close on time or remotely on time, because we're giving you the pregnancy date, and I talked about the closing date, not the closing date. You got to go over that one on 12 times because you're still not going to get it. And I said, you need to call your attorney and say, listen, I know it's your practice, or it's most attorneys' practice, not to order the search and survey until there's a mortgage commitment, because they don't want to start running their meters until they know they really have a firm deal. Say, listen, I need you to do this now. I need you to do what the contract calls for. I need you to start it within 5 days. Because if you do that, chances are you probably will close on time. You don't have to keep going back and saying, gee, I don't know what's happening. I guess they didn't order the search and survey. Oh, they did order. There's a million calls that you can avoid just by addressing that up front. Okay, and then we go to almost finished on the highlights here. Costs. Page 10, and it is ATC 3. Now, and one of the problems with this particular, the additional terms and conditions, there's nothing to fill in. So it's all what they call boilerplated, so no one reads it. And most people don't know what's in there. So I highlighted this one because this one is an interesting one. It says, except as otherwise provided, in addition to the costs set forth elsewhere in the contract, the seller shall pay for the search to the date of closing and for the survey, the transfer tax, the filing fee, the transfer tax for the recording fees, and other documentation required to cure any title defects. So we know what the seller is supposed to pay for. Those are the things the seller is supposed to pay. There's two exceptions to that. You want to know what the exceptions are?
Estate,
What?
estate,
No.
foreclosure.
Foreclosure is one of the exceptions. In a foreclosure, 99% of the time, those costs will be passed on to the buyer. Automatically. There's no discussion. Oh, you don't want to pay them? I guess you're not buying the property. The other one is, and this is pretty much automatic, is with builders. You buy a Forbes home, you buy a Murano home, they just put it in a contract, they don't even discuss it, and you're paying those fees. Now, I gotta tell you, transfer tax, in and of itself, if you're in Erie County and you're a youngin, like most of the people around Husvar real estate, as far as I know, like they're young. So they're gonna pay $9 per thousand. So if I'm selling a $500,000 house with one of the builders, and that's not unusual these days, well, it's an extra $4,500 they just socked in there like nothing. I'm sure everyone would love to have an extra $4,500 just for nothing. But all those other fees, they usually sock those in there too. So know who's paying those and know who's not paying. If it's a conventional transaction, the seller's paying them. But the two exceptions are foreclosures and most new build contracts. So ask the question and you'll be smarter for it. It's a beautiful thing. And the last thing that I'm going to talk about, and it's one of my favorites, is it's in this boilerplated page that the additional terms and conditions, no one ever sees it, no one ever reads it, and it's ATC 7. Final walkthrough. It's very specific, and I make sure if you do not go over this, you're going to have a problem at some point, and you're probably having a problem sooner or later. You need to go over this with the buyer, you need to go over this with the seller, whoever you're working with. When I'm with the buyer, I will always say, here's the deal. You have a home inspection? Good. When you're doing a home inspection, this is what you want to do. You're going to want to take your tape measure along, you want to take any notepads along, and you absolutely positively should be at the home inspection. If the buyer's not going to be at the home inspection, chances are you probably have a problem because they're going to rely on the document. The document is always a scary document because the home inspector has to justify his existence. So he's going to find a whole bunch of Mickey Mouse stuff. And then, well, gee, maybe I should read the rest. But if they're at the home inspection, he can say, well, this is a Mickey Mouse sign. Don't worry about it. This is come on, stop. You're not going to kill 500 pounds because this one outlet's out or something like that. But having said that, I would say bring your rules along because this will be the last time you come into this property until you do your final walkthrough. By the way, it's not because anyone's trying to hide it. It's in the contract. See, that's the safety net. It's in the contract. Nobody's going to be a bad guy in this. Because, and you say, well, what happens if they say, well, we're 3 weeks into the contract, you've got your home inspection done, you've got your appraisal done, and they call you, and we call this, people like abbreviations, like FHA and ARM, all these credits. And here's one of my favorites. It's DOA, dead on arrival, when you get this one. My mother-in-law is in from out of town, and she used to live in Chickamauga, and she's really excited about buying in Chickamauga, and so she was just wondering, because can we just take her through what we go through and measure from this? And I said, you know what? This is how I handle it. I said, if you remember, we talked about this when you did the home inspection. That was the last time until you do your final walkthrough. Stick with me, I'm going somewhere. And they said, oh yeah, well, can't you make an exception? And I said, you know what? Let me see what I can do. And I said, because I don't ever want to be the bad guy. And I don't want the other agent to necessarily be the bad guy either, but I want there to be some limits here, okay? Home inspections, any of these little things, they're all called weasel clauses, okay? And sometimes, remember, you can't kill the weasel, you can only contain the weasel. So I want to contain this weasel a little bit here. And I'll say, let me make a phone call. I will call the listing agent and say, listen, I just got a phone call, and my buyer is very excited, and my mother-in-law's here from out of town, they want to go and show that. I said, but I'm going to ask, I know you're probably going to say no, and it's not that you're going to say no, and it's not probably that the seller's probably going to say no, but they would probably say no too. But as we're both aware, and I've explained this to them, that the contract calls specifically for one more walkthrough, and I'm going to read it to you right now. It says, before closing, But after a loan commitment has been accepted, and upon turn it off and still going. Can't kill it. Where is it? And before closing, and upon reasonable notice, the purchaser shall have the right to see that magical word in it, a single final inspection on the property. And yeah, that they'll be utilities. They get one. Here's the reason why that's in there. One, anyone that has sold a house will tell you it is a royal pain in the ass to sell a house. It's not a fun process. It's easy to live in a house, but to sell a house, you got to keep the dishes out of the sink, you got to keep beds made, you got people coming and going. They've had it up to here by the time they get to a contract. They don't want to do this anymore. They don't want to keep getting bothered. That's why that clause is in there. The other reason the clause is in there is because the more people come back and look at a house, the more they start saying, gee, I didn't realize the walls are gray. Gee, I didn't realize the ceilings are not 12 feet. Gee, I didn't realize the plumbing was indoors. Whatever it is, they're going to find stuff. And I guarantee you, when the mother-in-law wants to go, it's a DOA or a KOD, kiss of death. She's going to go in there and she's going to say, wow, you paid how much for this house? Do you realize what I paid for my first? Yeah, it was 50 years ago. It has no bear, but she's going to fire them up. There's no way mothers-in-law cannot fire them up. That's what so I avoid the whole thing. When I go back to the conversation I was going to have with that agent, I said, of course, I said, you know, that's what so if you're going to tell me that no, the contract speaks for itself, I will be happy to go back and tell them that. That's the way I handle it. Because part of my job, I believe, you can disagree, but I believe that if I'm working for a buyer, I have to get them the best deal that's available, which means they have to pay over the asking price. But I also need to protect them from themselves, because I am getting paid to get them from contract to closing, and so they can live happily ever after. And more times than not, there'll be speed bumps somewhere along the way. It's not a reason to sell the car. It's not a reason to pull off the hire. It's, here's the thing. We're going to get this thing to go back. Sometimes you do have to protect them from themselves, because buyers get weird. Sellers get weird. So use the contract to work for you, but don't use it so if you don't go over these things with a buyer, take 2 or 3 minutes to go over, certainly at least the things that I talked about with respect to the closings and stuff like that. But clause number 3, the lawsuit clause, very important. If you do not go over it, you're going to have trouble at some point. The thing about the draperies, I went over it about a year or two ago, and the person said to me, oh yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do want to keep my kitchen curtains. Now the kitchen, and I said, no problem. And I wrote it off. The kitchen curtains were probably worth about $20, but she made them herself, and it meant something to her. But you know that if somebody goes in there and they're expecting to see them, all of a sudden now they're calling you out and saying you're a bad guy. What's going on there? I think they're trying to cheat me. The other thing that's in there, which I didn't talk about, is the light bulbs. They've actually had to put in the clause number 3, I skipped over, about the light bulbs. I tell everybody, here's the deal. I said, you got to leave these people light bulbs. You can't leave them in the freaking dark. I sold a house in Tonawanda a year or 2 ago, and when I went over that, he said, oh no, he says, I'm taking the light bulbs. I said, here's the deal. If we get you over the asking price, will you leave the light bulbs? And he said, well, how much over? He said, how about 10,000 over? Oh yeah, I'll leave the light bulbs. It just makes it cleaner and easier for everybody. But there were the smart bulbs, and he had a lot of smart bulbs. What would a house full of smart bulbs be worth? How much? $250? He got $35,000 over the asking price. He could have at least left what PS he did. So try to work clean. Try not to go back and have to be obligated to fix your deals. Get them right the first time by going over the key points. Key points being the lawsuit clause, that the closing is just a target date. It is not a concrete drop dead date. It's just a target date. And also think about the final walkthrough. Those are the places your chances are you're going to probably have some problems. And that's my story for today. And I don't know if I can flip back to get to the fireplace because it's not my computer. But hey, we did the best we can under terrible circumstances with bad technology. And that's my story. Questions from the peanut gallery? Anyone? Yes? Yes? No? Indifferent? Did you learn anything?
Yeah.
Yep. And you've been in the business for more than 10 years.
20.
20 years. You can always learn more things. You can always get a different spin on things. And I think part of the culture here is that we want you to be better. We want you to keep getting better. And sometimes you have to sharpen your blade a little bit. And sometimes you have to take a look at things that you thought you knew something about and look at them from a different perspective. That's the perspective that I have. I mean, my job is to get these things to close. My job is sometimes to protect the seller from themselves and to protect the buyer from themselves. And the best way to do that is to have a lot of money in the escrow account. It keeps people really, really honest. And it makes the buyer look better as a buyer, right? It makes the seller feel better as a seller. The thing that's interesting about the escrow deposit, they really haven't kept pace, especially in Western Europe, with the rest of the country. And people, they tend to do smaller escrow deposits. And if you think about it, it doesn't make a lot of sense. If I'm selling a $500,000 house and somebody wants to put down $1,000, I mean, that's just goofy. But you see contracts like that all the time. It's like they're not very earnest. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's my story. Stay tuned. We'll have more and fun subjects coming up over the next couple of weeks and months. Brendan Cunningham signing out for Husvar Real Estate.